Thank you very much. Welcome to the meeting of the Pension Board of the Royal Borough of Kensington Chelsea Pension Scheme. I'm Councillor Charles Williams and I chair the board. And I would start by asking, are there any apologies for absence? No, I don't think there are. I think everyone is here. Can I suggest, ask that we, before we introduce ourselves, we have the 72-second silence for the victims of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. Thank you. Thank you. The next item is I'll ask the other members of the board to introduce themselves and to declare interest. But firstly, I will explain that this meeting is live streamed. It's being held in accordance with the regulations that allow meetings to be held virtually. I have no interest to declare, save that I have a very small pension from the pension scheme. Any other, would the other members of the board like to introduce themselves?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Oh.
Go on. Yeah, go on, Lynn.
Okay, I'm Lynn Myers. I'm the vice chair of the pension board. I'm a pensioner, former employee representative. I, like Councillor Williams, receive a pension from the scheme.
I'm Councillor Malcolm Spalding, Councillor for Earls Court Ward. I am one of the employer representatives on the board. I do have a small self-invested personal pension, which I manage myself, and I might be referring to that later in the meeting, but I have no pecuniary interest in anything we're discussing today. Thank you, Chairman.
I think there's just Kenneth and Andrew, yes.
Yeah, Kenneth, would you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm Ken Davison. I'm a scheme member representative, and I'm also in receipt of an RBKC local government pension.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to see you all again on this bright sunny day. My name's Andy Ormond. I'm an employee of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea Council. I'm a member of the local government scheme, but not yet old enough to actually claim any of the pension, which I guess is a good thing. And obviously just here to advise as best that I can.
Okay, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is minutes of the pension board meeting held on the 24th of November, which was our last meeting. Are we agreed those are an accurate record of our discussions?
Agreed.
Thank you. So I will sign those. I think any matters arising can be dealt with under specific items. And then we have the minutes of the meeting of the pension. So the investment committee was held actually before our meeting, which given to us for information. So I didn't have any comments on that. If we may, then can we move on?
Chairman, I've got one
please.
Small comment on the minutes of the investment committee.
Yes.
Under A4, they talk about their quarterly performance review, and they want to look at their asset allocation and rebalancing. This is where I was going to refer to managing my own self-invested personal pension. The platform I use for that every so often gives me a summary of what the investments are, and also which sectors are covered by those investments. And I have no doubt that the investment committee does this, but I wonder do we get to see their asset allocations, where their money actually is invested, and do we see? I mean, I get a pie chart showing me, so much is in pharmaceuticals, so much is in mining, so much is in retail, and so on. And since one of our jobs is to monitor risks, I think we ought to have a regular update on what the asset allocation is by fund and also by sector.
Yes, I think we were just talking to Mr. Triggs before you joined us about the fund is quite heavily invested in tracker funds, but perhaps he'd like to respond to that point.
Yes, Chairman, it's something that we certainly could arrange to include in the information pack. So a breakdown by sector within the equities portfolio. I'm sure we could do that per fund manager and for the fund as a whole. So I'll speak to Julia with a view to getting that included.
Thank you. Right, thank you.
That would be really helpful, Chairman. Thank you. I mean, there might be an extreme where, we're 100% invested in something which is very risky. I don't think we are at all, but I just don't see the actual facts in front of us.
Yes, I think the information is there in reports going to the investment committee, but yes, it'd be helpful to have a summary. Right.
Sorry to be a bore, but my last point is under A7 of their minutes. The grammar goes a bit skew-whiff in the last couple of lines under A7. I think they mean they had also undertaken. Yes,
I think that's really for the investment committee to.
But that's for them to approve their minutes.
Yeah.
Chair, I'll point that out to the clerk and ask him to correct all of that.
Fine. Right. Well, thank you very much. And moving on to A5, risk management. Just remind us how often this report comes to this board.
So I can take that one, Chair. Yes. Hello, everyone. So I think we bring this report. It's a regular report that we bring to each meeting just for board members to review and make comment as necessary.
Right. Thank you very much. If you could introduce it to draw our attention to any particular points.
So I can introduce this. Hello, everybody. Hope everyone is okay today. So this is just introducing the risk register. Nothing's changed in terms of the format. So it's divided into two sections. We have the governance and we have the pensions administration. Particularly focusing on the pensions administration, I think there was a few topics of discussion at the last meeting. So hopefully some things are clarified in this report. So we've got a range of the risks that are identified. We either treat, tolerate, transfer or terminate the risk. All the risks, I think we had a discussion at the last one, whereas why some of the risks were scored as they were. And we had the discussion that they are all subjective, but we're happy to sort of have the discussions and make changes as we see fit. And we do feel that at the moment everything is captured and all the key risks have been recognised. I've included the matrix just for some extra clarification as to how the risks are scored by officers. And then you can see in the risks, we've got the columns, we have the impact, and it's measured across the fund, and each of these are added together to provide the total. The likelihood score represents the expected outcome if any of the risks were ignored, and the revised likelihood is the score once the action's been taken with the mitigating actions in place. So just to draw your attention to some of the things that have been changed since the last meeting. So at the top of the administration's risk, you'll see that we've added an explicit risk to identify the transferring of sensitive member data. I think this was something that was discussed, and David Coates gave quite a good information about what's going to happen. So obviously there's quite a few things on this particular risk that will change on 1st of April. But I think it's important that we capture the current risks, especially as the contract terminates on the 1st of April. So these risks will be going into the annual report as Surrey will still be doing the administration functions. So risk 1, a pension administration budget has been agreed by officers for the next 5 years, which factors in resolving outstanding data issues and provision for training. So the likelihood rating of 3, you can see how this represents 21% to 50% chance when you look at the matrix. And we thought this would have been higher at the start of the process, but we felt that the project progressed positively and everything seems to be in place at the moment. So we've reduced the revised likelihood to a 2. And a similar thing with the COVID for the risk 2. So although it had a potential effect to affect the services and the functions, the risk has since reduced. So that is why you will see the risk reducing in the revised likelihood score. So hopefully that clears up any of the questions that was raised last time. But as I say, we're happy to make changes as anyone sees fit and take comments on board. But I think there will be an update following this termination from Surrey and bringing the services in-house. We'll definitely need to have a review of this.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think one general comment is, and the question is, when the transfer is complete, obviously, as you say, some of these risks will be reviewed and some relating to fund management won't be per se. Would it be an idea to actually try to reduce the number of risks? I mean, I know I'm guilty for adding one more last time, but perhaps to have fewer risks and to focus more on them. I would be interested to hear comments from both members of the board and officers on that suggestion.
I think, Chairman, you're correct that if there are a vast number of risks, it's a danger of not seeing the wood for the trees. And some things which are not really risks at all don't need to be there. But there are a couple of things that should be up, which I want to raise later, which will be added, because I think they are really risky and they're not reflected. But can I just say also, in the little summary that you gave us, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, you didn't mention the worst risk of all, which is your one admin risk 5, which has gone up from a 2 to a 3. And I just wondered why that one, where the red arrow had been left out of the in the report.
I can answer that one. So I think this is just to identify that we made the decision to transfer this risk to Surrey. So at the moment, making that decision did increase the risk because we are terminating that contract. So that is a risk. But once the contract comes into place, that risk will be removed, and we will have to update it following the 1st of April.
the risk 5 under admin risk 5 is about staff competence, which I would have thought there ought to be some mitigations to do with staff training.
I think when we move on to the pension administration update, we can sort of look at staffing issues, which I certainly want to do.
Okay, I've got several things to say on this, Chairman. I don't have anything to say on any of the other papers, but I went on to the local government pension scheme training day in February. And this is the risk that I think, I don't know if any other members of the board were at that training. It was on the 3rd of February.
Yeah, I think I went.
They, of course, identified this huge new risk, which everyone's getting very worried about, is when people want to transfer out and manage their own pension fund. And a lot of people are being scammed. You know, there's a whole industry now around scamming people. And as I said, some of these scams don't come to light, really, sometimes for maybe a year later. And it all depends on what sort of financial advice that they've been getting from IFAs, right? Do they stay in the local government scheme or do they come out of it? And Jeff Houston, of course, who I think everybody here knows of and respect, he says it's something that should start to come into our risk assessment about how do we look after people with independent financial advice who are thinking of transferring out of the local government scheme. Because if we give them the wrong advice, we become hugely liable. That was the thrust of his advice to all schemes and all boards. I just wonder if we should take that on board as a risk.
Well, I think I'd like to hear from the officers how they respond to that concern.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, good afternoon, everyone. David Coates. So I think the training issue, Councillor, which you just referred to earlier, I'll cover under the pension administration update, if I may. Yeah. Secondly, with regards to the scamming issue, you're absolutely right about that. There is going to be much more emphasis ongoing in terms of people who are potentially liable to scams. We know of one potential case in RBKC that happened about 4 years ago. We don't know of any others at this stage. So what we're doing, in fact, as part of the notification that we're sending out to all scheme members in March about the transfer of the pensions to RBKC, for active and deferred members, we are including further information about scams within that letter that's going out to all scheme members. In addition, what happens is that the moment that Surrey do include reference to scams in their newsletter to all members, although it's probably not highlighted as much as it should be. Myself and my colleague Maria Bailey, who's the operational manager, we in fact did discuss this a few weeks ago in terms of what more we could do when we take over the service to try and prevent scamming, or at least highlight people's awareness of it. We have one of the things I think that we've said that we would look at once we take over the administration is the need to insist that before people transfer their pension out of the LGPS, if it's going to a non-LGPS or non-public sector scheme, that we see whether we can insist, whether we can get the person to confirm that they've actually received independent financial advice. So that's one of the things that we will be looking at. We're not quite sure yet how enforceable that is, but certainly you're absolutely right. I think it would be a good idea to include something on the risk register about scamming to see whether or not we can do more about that to prevent potential scamming taking place.
Thank you. I mean, I think the point, Malcolm, is that we do not give people financial advice, but we may, and I think we do have a duty to see that they have taken financial advice, which is a requirement in the case of these transfers.
Yes, you're right. We're not regulated to give financial advice to any scheme members about their pension. The issue for us is whether we've followed the correct procedures in making sure that that person is aware that if they do transfer their LGPS pension out of a public sector fund, that they've done so with, firstly, that we've done it in accordance with the procedures, and that we've identified and highlighted to that person as part of the transfer what risks might be associated with the transfer if they take their pension out of a public sector scheme to a private scheme. So you're right, the liability would fall on us, or we would share some liability if we didn't follow the correct procedure. So we do have to be quite careful to, when we do highlight this to scheme members, to make it clear we're not giving them advice. We are simply pointing out to them what the risks may be. The issue for us is whether we can insist that they get independent financial advice before transferring their pension out of a public sector scheme. So we are looking at that at the moment, but in the notification we send out in March about the transfer of the service, there will be a leaflet going out with that notification about planning.
Okay. Any other further questions or comments on this?
Chairman, just a couple of other brief points, unless anybody else. Governance, the risks under governance. Under governance 28, which is on the penultimate risk page, and again a bit later on, it seems to consistently refer to the Pension Fund Committee, and I just wonder if that means the Investment Committee.
It does, yes.
I think that should be changed then. And then finally, governance 37 on the last page. It says committee members do not have appropriate skills or knowledge. Now, perhaps this is something where the pension board has a role and a responsibility. I'm chairman of member training and development, and I wonder if we ought to monitor training and development of the investment committee, because I know that some of them don't have much training, or don't have much of a council training record, and I just wonder if it's one of our responsibilities to monitor the kind of training that the investment committee are giving themselves.
I think Mr. Triggs wants to respond to that.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We do monitor the training that we provide, both to the committee and the pension board. So the half mornings that we have set aside for specific training, one of which is tomorrow morning, all of that is logged against the various investment categories of knowledge and training that can be accessed over a particular year. So tomorrow's event is the third one in this particular financial year. If we provide training to a committee or board specifically for a meeting, then that is also logged. And we do try to monitor the events that you go to outside. If you let us know, that we can also log that on the matrix. So we are required to keep these records because the pension fund is registered as a professional investor with the city, and in order to achieve that professional status, we do need to keep records of the training that you've received.
Thank you.
Well, my point, Chairman, was is it something that the board, the pension board, should be actually looking at the data and actually scrutinising the training that has taken place annually, and even do it by individual members, because otherwise are we not discharging that responsibility which we might otherwise have?
I think I'm slightly anxious to preserve the harmonious relationship we have with the investment committee, and possibly I think we could ask Mr. Triggs to report to us perhaps once a year on training by both investment committee and pension board members, and if there were any particular gaps in the as far as the investment committee concerns, the chairman of the board perhaps could have a word with the chairman of the investment committee.
Yes, Chairman, we could on an annual basis, if you like. So we could start with the next committee. We could provide the previous year's matrix.
Yeah.
And then obviously we're very happy to edit and amend, add as necessary. If there are other events that you've attended, we can make sure they're included. But
I think this is something which is included in the fund's annual report, isn't it? Perhaps I'm wrong. Yeah. Okay.
What we've got, Chairman, is the investment committee tomorrow. We will be. Oh, actually, it's on. I think it's on. Yes, it's tomorrow, the 24th. There is a separate agenda item for a fund business plan. And one of the established items within that plan is the provision of training. Now, on an annual basis, it is our intention to provide at the end of the year an outturn report of that business plan to provide a narrative as to what we've actually achieved with the plan. And obviously, with the section on training, then the outcome in terms of every bit of training that's being provided will be included. So that is now really established within the mechanism of governance.
Thank you. Right, no, that's helpful. Any further comments on the risk register? Well, as I say, I would be very open to proposals from officers to reduce the number of risks. Obviously, you'd come and tell us the ones you propose to remove. I think it might be helpful to subdivide it more clearly into administrative risks, governance risks, and what could only be described as fund management risks. Because I think they are sort of set in order, but the perhaps the sections could be more clearly delineated.
Yes, that's an interesting point, Chairman. The committee at Hammersmith and Fulham recently conducted a governance review by an external consultant, and one of the recommendations that came up was that the fund should follow the framework set out in a CITFA code of practice on pension fund governance, and it does provide a suggested layout and categorization of risks. So the report recommended we follow that particular framework, which is obviously in an established code of practice and would be a good thing for the fund. So as part of the tri-borough approach, it is our intention to have a fresh look at the way we lay these risks.
Yeah, I haven't seen what the model that you suggested. That could be helpful. I mean, one thing I'm sort of would hope is that the investment committee, I think, rather expects us to keep an eye on administration, but I think it does focus on risk, obviously, because a lot of investment managers, it's about risk management. But if the investment risks were presented to it sort of quite starkly and compactly, I mean, I think that would sort of help concentrate their minds and perhaps encourage them to look at some of the issues they do from a slightly different perspective. And I mean, that could be helpful, looking at the same problem two different ways. That's my thoughts on the matter. Yes, we're very open to going down the direction that's been recommended at Hammersmith and Fulham, I think.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good. Okay. I'll just make a note of that. Fine, that's dealt with this. Now we move on to the pension administration update, which I think covers both performance and also the transfer. And I think I suggested this might be an opportunity to discuss future staffing levels and costs. Thank you. I think is David going to introduce this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. This is an update to the pension board on key administration issues that were considered at the previous meeting. This report merely updates you on where we currently are with those issues. So the key issues are listed in paragraph 2.1, which are undecided leavers, which has been a big issue for us in terms of making sure that records are up to date. Outstanding casework management, Surrey key performance indicators, and then finally the transfer to the in-house service. And if I may, I'll cover the costs issue that you've raised as part of the transfer to the in-house service. So firstly, on undecided leavers, I think board members will be aware from paragraph 3.2 of the report that we started off in October 2019 with having about 1,235 undecided leavers. So an undecided leaver is where someone has basically not appeared on a year-end return that's gone to Surrey. So we think they've left. The employer hasn't sent a leaver form into Surrey to process them as a leaver, but they've simply missed them off of the year-end return, which implies that they've left, basically. So since October 2019, those numbers, the 1,200 that we started with, by February this year had got down to 173. So those 173 cases, we've now sent all of the information for those cases to Surrey. So before we exit Surrey in late March this year, we do expect them to have updated those 173 remaining cases on their system, so that when the information comes over to us, theoretically, all of the data for all the undecided leavers should now be recorded on Surrey's system. I think I've mentioned in paragraph 3.4 that there will be some follow-on actions required, which Surrey have said that they can't do because they don't have the resources to deal with that. So that's something that we will be doing when we take over the service from April. And those follow-on actions are to basically process then the member record to completion. So that means doing a calculation on the pension system to make the person turn the record into an undecided leaver record. So that Surrey have loaded all the data. It's simply a case of running the process and then sending a letter to the member to let them know that they are now a leaver on the system. So that's something we'll be doing in May this year when Hayward release, that's Hayward, the system administration provider, release an update to their software, which will enable us to automate that process rather than having to do it case by case. So I'm expecting that by the end of May, all of those records should have been turned into actual leavers on the pensions admin system. We're still expecting that there will be more future undecided leavers as a result of this year's end of year exercise. But our intention is to chase those down much quicker than Surrey have done in the past. So we're expecting that really undecided leavers going forwards from this year onwards, 2021-22, should become much less of an issue for us. In section 4, casework management, again, board members I think will be aware that last time we started off with, back in October 2020, about 1,233 outstanding cases that Surrey have basically had on their system where they hadn't resolved those cases. So these will be anything from deferred member quotes, things like transfers in, transfers out, inter-fund issues, member inquiries, a range of different requests. So the chart that's under 4.1 basically shows you what's happened to those cases between October last year and February this year. So what we've been doing with SORI is getting them to review any cases that predate 2019 and then either close them down or move them into a new active case with revised target dates into 2020. So what you'll see is, although there's been a very modest decrease in the numbers of cases in the total column, what you'll see is that the majority of those cases that predated 2019 have actually shifted into the 2020 year, so that when those cases come over to us at the beginning of April, we will be able to work to updated target dates to resolve them. What we found, you can see in paragraph 4.3, that about 1/3 of those cases cover 4 different types of tasks. The largest being deferred member processing. So this is where someone has basically become a deferred member, they've left, but their record hasn't been updated. And therefore they haven't, on the system, as far as the system is concerned, the task to actually complete the process of making them a deferred member hasn't actually been done by SORI. So we are expecting, once we take over the service in April, that we will have to allocate all of these tasks out to a data recovery team that we're setting up, who will be responsible for progressing these on a priority basis. It's going to take, we think it's going to take between anything between 1 and 2 years to clear these cases. Ideally, and I think we're expecting that the majority will be completed in year 1, partly because of the fact that I think I mentioned earlier that there will be some automated processing that the pension system provider are introducing, which will make it easy to close some of these down. But also because we have done a lot of work in the background anyway to actually correct member data going forwards. In paragraph 5, I've just listed here the SORI KPIs. So these are the latest KPIs that we have from SORI for January 2021. As you can see from the score that's highlighted in yellow, SORI's performance has not been as good as we expected or had hoped. The areas where they've fallen short significantly in terms of producing or outputs to the targets are in deferred retirement benefits being processed, where you can see that they've had a 46% success rate compared to the 100% target. And then to a lesser extent, transfers in, transfers out, which have always been a problem for SORI, I think. But in particular, they seem to be paying less attention to this as we head towards the exit. So I do think that on the whole, that the area where most activity and most work is required in terms of the difficulty of processing cases will be in transfers in and transfers out, simply because they're very involved. So we know that we have a lot of work to do in that area to catch up in terms of transfers in and transfers out. There's probably about 200 cases in total between transferring in and transferring out between funds, where we need to actually get those completed once we take over. Overall, you can see in paragraph 5.2 that the overall number of late cases is 11%. That's 26 out of 230 cases. Slightly better than last September's figures, which were 13%. Still not acceptable, but to be frank, I don't think we're expecting really any improvement from SORI between now and when we exit at the end of March. Which brings me on to section 6, which is the transfer to the in-house service from 1st of April. So the transfer remains on target. We do expect to transfer fully from SORI on the 1st of April this year, and on the whole, I think the project's gone quite well. In paragraph 6.2, you can see that the achievements that we've had since the last meeting with the pension board are that we've completed all of the user training, phases 1 and phases 2. So this is something that I know was referred to earlier as part of the risk assessment. We have gone through about 6 weeks of user training in total to use the administration system. And then coupled with that, what we've been doing is we've been going through all of the individual processes step by step. So we've identified about 67 individual processes that need to be managed by us when we take over. And what we're doing is that we are documenting each step of those processes to make sure that we understand what the process is and what the outputs are that are required from each step of the process as well. And this information is being used to complete the user training and also to support the production of workflow within the pensions administration system, which will support the task completion of each of the different types of tasks that we have to do. So the way that the system will work is that when a team member gets an inquiry coming in or a piece of work, it's allocated to a workflow task, and then the workflow task guides the member of staff through each step of the process by taking them to the different screens in the system that will then enable them to complete the process. We've also, you can see in paragraph 6.2, completed our test data loads into the system. The final data load will be done at the end of March. We've agreed our payslip formats and P60 formats, and they're being tested at the moment before the data gets printed. We are in the process of testing member self-service setup as well. In paragraph 6.3, you can see that the next steps for the project are to complete the payroll parallel running for February and March. So we've just started February's parallel run. To complete all the documentation of our processes. It says 81 there, but we've actually been able to reduce those to 67 by compressing some of them because they are similar types of process. So transfers in, for example, there are different types of transfers in, but we've been able to compress them into one single transfer in process. We're also setting up the BACS process so that we can pay the pensioners from April. And you can see there that we're working with Surrey to try and make sure that they do complete those remaining 173 undecided leavers. I'm wondering, Chair, if this is an appropriate time for me to then comment on the costs issue that was raised.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So if I may, I'll share with you a screen which actually does show you some cost comparisons. Just bear with me while I find the information. So whilst my computer's just finding the screen, here we go. So I think the question that was raised was around the increasing costs between moving from Surrey to RBKC compared to if we had stayed with Surrey. Hopefully you can see this screen now.
Yeah.
So the top section up here shows you what the pension administration estimated costs are by moving from Surrey. So you can see here I've reflected the column headings that were in the report that was going to the investment committee. So we have employees, but I've broken that down into our baseline permanent staff and then our data recovery team. So the total costs here are the costs that are reflected in the report to the investment committee, but they do comprise two separate parts. The data recovery team is a group of 4 FTEs that are temporary members of staff, whereas our employees in this line are permanent members of staff. So what you can see is that in 2021 to 22, you'll be aware that the cost was showing on the investment committee report at 1.324 million. Compared to Surrey's earlier costs of around 575 to 580,000. So the areas where there's a difference between our proposed costs compared to had we stayed with Surrey are that, firstly, what I'm expecting to see was, although in 2021-22 our estimated cost will be at 1.324 million, You can see that this will then reduce by 2025 to 26 to an estimated 918,000. Now, the reason for that is that, firstly, this line up here for our employees working in data recovery, we expect that at the very latest, by 2022 to 23, we will lose those 4 members of staff because data recovery will have been completed by that time. Obviously, there's no Surrey recharge for those years, but you can also see that here in 2021 to 22, we incur significant additional costs on software licenses and fees from the software provider because of the purchase of the new system. However, most of those drop out from 2022 to 23 onwards, which then accounts for a gradual reduction in the costs by the end of 2025 to 26 of 918,000. If we compare that to the Surrey costs down here, this will give you probably a bit more light in terms of what I think probably would have happened to Surrey's costs had we stayed with them. So what wasn't included in the figures that you saw was our data recovery costs, which I've included here. And in fact, I've stuck an extra 1 year onto that because not managing the system ourselves would have meant we would have had to have held on to those staff for longer, because the process of updating the system with Surrey, communicating them, is that much more difficult doing it remotely than if we were doing it ourselves. As far as the Surrey recharge is concerned, at the moment that's comprising 225,000 for staffing and then 87.9 for software. Surrey have said to us this year that they expected that 225,000 would increase to 337 had we stayed with them. So you can see here that I've put in an estimated 337 for the remainder of the period. But what this doesn't show is that Surrey were not intending necessarily to stay with their current software provider from 2021 to 22 onwards. So we know that Surrey have to look at procuring or re-procuring a software system in that year. So we expect that the procurement costs would, for us as an individual borough, would have come to around 80,000 in both years. The first year in terms of the actual procurement costs themselves, and the second year potentially in terms of the additional staff costs from Surrey involved in making the transfer happen to an alternative system. And they have indicated to us that they're likely to move to an alternative system. However, this is pure conjecture because we wouldn't know what those potential ongoing costs would be. So I haven't included here any additional potential ongoing costs from Surrey that would have resulted from them changing systems. It could be less, it could be more, we don't know. Comparing the costs had we stayed with Surrey, then you can see that by 2025 to 26, those estimated costs would have been around £703,000 compared to the costs of running the service ourselves, which is 918,000. So the difference is an estimated 215,000. So yearly, after the end of a 5-year period, I would expect those costs, the additional costs for running the service in-house, would be around £200,000. Potentially could be slightly less depending upon how much additional costs Surrey would charge us for running their system, and bearing in mind that Surrey are losing other clients, and so we would expect, had we stayed with Surrey, then our proportion of their charges would have been higher. Does anyone have any questions on that? Because I know that that's probably a quick run through, but I think I've tried to give you an idea of what the cost comparison would be had we stayed with Surrey compared to running the system ourselves.
I think yes, we're always well aware it's going to be more expensive, but it was helpful to have that rundown. My only question was, is there any benchmarking, any comparison with other members of the LGPS?
For a borough of our size, we think that in terms of staffing, which is where the majority of the cost actually lies, we expect that there would be between 7 and 8 full-time equivalent members of staff to run the service. So you'd be talking about the costs up here in terms of our employees. At the moment, we've factored in 10.5, partly because we've put in a little bit extra in there in terms of potential long-term data issues, and also we factored into the equation the additional costs that are likely to be incurred from the McCloud exercise.
Right, okay.
In terms of extra staffing resource required to update member records. We don't know yet what the impact of that will be on staffing resource. So it is possible that our full-time equivalent numbers will reduce from this figure here for 2020 by 2025-26. So on average, I think if you're taking an average borough of our size, it's around anything between 6 and 8 FTE. That's what we would expect to see if everything was running smoothly.
Okay, thank you. So it's possible then that other things being equal, we might actually get the numbers down in the medium term below the figures here.
That's correct.
Right.
Chairman, could I ask a question?
Please.
Just David, just to confirm that you'll be working to the similar target turnaround times that Surrey currently do for their benchmarking. So if you achieve better, then obviously we're getting a better outcome.
That's right. Yes. I mean, I think it's what's happening is with all of the workflow tasks that we are devising within the system, we will be using almost the identical target timescales that we're using with Surrey. The difference being that Surrey are mostly not meeting those timescales, whereas we would expect that we would meet all of them or the vast majority. So I think you're right that it's fair to say that the money that we're spending on Surrey at the moment doesn't really give us value for money in terms of the outputs that we get from Surrey. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had one other question actually relating to the earlier part of your presentation, which was the problems, in particular the undecided leaders. Do they disproportionately concern scheduled and admitted bodies, or do they significantly refer to RBKC employees as well?
Proportionately, they are about equal in terms of their distribution over between the different employers. I think the reason for that is because we had a period where BT were running the payroll service.
Oh yes, of course.
2015 to 2018, where they sent very few leaver forms over to Surrey, and that caused immense problems. So we do, I mean, that's not a problem now with Hampshire, because Hampshire are sending leaver information through every month. So we would expect longer term that would slightly change, so that more of the issues around undecided leavers would come from external employers. Having said that, we are proposing to move to the iConnect electronic data exchange system with employers by the end of 2021-22, which means that instead of sending a year-end return to us, they so that we get all of the information coming at the end of the year, we get it through monthly instead, so that we would identify starters and leavers every month, as opposed to having to wait to the financial year end to deal with them. So that's in our work plan for the coming financial year, to move all of our employers onto iConnect, so that we actually have monthly electronic data updates for member data. That should cure the problem of undecided leavers.
Well, we shall see. Thank you very much for a very full presentation. Any more questions from members? Thank you very much. I think I will send a copy, relevant members and Mr. Coates and Mr. Triggs in, a short note to Councillor Marshall, because probably I think he would be reassured to know that we had discussed this issue, because I suspect should I put it this way, the investment committee has less appetite for discussing pension administration than we do. And I think the understanding is that we will look after it on their behalf. But as it's on his agenda, I think I will send him a note. to say we have had a full discussion about this. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next time we meet, you will have transferred.
Indeed, yes, that's right.
Well, good luck.
Thank you very much.
Now, the next one is the Pension Administration Strategy, A7.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Right, if you'd like to introduce that.
Yes, thank you. Pension Board will be aware that Regulation 59 of the Local Government Pension Scheme Regulations do require the administering authority to prepare a pension administration strategy. We do have an administration strategy at the moment, but it was last updated in August 2016. So we've taken this opportunity with the changeover from Surrey to just review the document as it currently stands and update it. And what you have in front of you is the proposed updated version of that document. The main changes, I think, are, as you can probably see in section 2.1, we've replaced all references to Surrey County Council with RBKC. So the intention is that this document takes effect from the 1st of April this year. And we would actually publish it to all employers in the fund, provided it's confirmed that there are no issues with the document. Also in sections 5 and 6, we've reviewed all of the timescales for, or target timescales to complete activities. So these are things like turnaround times for both us and employers in the fund to do particular tasks, things like transferring out pensions, processing starter forms, leaver forms, that type of thing. And then also what we've done in sections 5 and 6 is really perhaps more clearly define some of the employer responsibilities in terms of the submission of data monthly and annually. And I've also included here the reference to the move to iConnect electronic data submission later in the 2021 to 22 financial year. So really what we've done is we've used this document to basically update our responsibilities and the responsibilities of employers, and referencing the fact that we do expect to move later on by the end of the financial year into the electronic data exchange. It's fair to say that since we've had the policy in place since 2016, there have been very few queries around it. We do occasionally refer to it when employers are not sending information in to us monthly, so things like a schedule of monthly contributions or remittance. So the section towards the end of the document that basically sets out the potential charges that actually have to be levied to employers. So under section 6, the schedule of charging, I think it's fair to say that although we have, there have been 1 or 2 employers where we've threatened, in inverted commas, the charges to be levied against them, we haven't never actually done that because eventually they do comply. So we've never actually had to levy charges against an employer for failure to comply with their responsibilities. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? I don't have any.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we just asked to note it, so we shall note it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Malcolm, yes.
Chairman, yeah, sorry. On page 8 of A7, it's under section 3, roles and responsibility, the last but one bullet point on page 8. I read this 4 times and I can't quite get my head around what it actually means. It starts where a member leaves the scheme. I just wondered if somebody who's brighter than I am can explain what it actually means.
Page 8, did you say?
Yeah, it's the last but one bullet point under section 3, so it's just above section 4.
Yes. I see what you're referring to. Bear with me. Okay, so what that perhaps it's not worded very well, that particular bullet point. What this refers to is that a scheme employer has the responsibility, if one of their members is leaving the scheme, but they haven't deducted full contributions from that member, to then immediately make sure that those contributions are deducted and pay the outstanding contributions to us. So this could be in a situation where they have someone who may have left.
We're the administering authority, and
yes, that's right. We're the administering authority, and this could be in a situation where an employer has an employee who has decided that they would just leave that employer's employment. But for some reason, the person's final pay, for example,
sorry about this, Chairman, if you can hear me. I've got a very bad connection today, but the answer was good. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Right. Okay. Right, well, thank you very much, David. We now move on to A8, Pension Communications Policy. We did have some, I think going back a couple of years, a bit of a dialogue with officers about pension communications, and there was some discussion about where they did have a member walk-in sort of morning with Surrey. That was before we started to look at moving from Surrey. So it's a good time to refresh the communications policy. Right.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So as you know, we do have a communications policy at the moment. This is a requirement under Regulation 61 of the scheme regulations, and it does require us to set out a policy for communicating with scheme members, member representatives, prospective members, and also employers in the fund. So this document is really just a refreshed version of the document that's currently in place. The main changes, as you can see in section 2.1, are that, again, we've replaced references for Surrey with RBKC. We've reviewed all of the communication methods to ensure that they are still relevant and made some minor changes. We've also changed website addresses. So, for example, things like member self-service. We will no longer be using Surrey's self-service website to support self-service for our scheme members. So in section, in the main body of the report, the main area that's changed is in section 3.1, where I've mentioned here that this is a general overview of how we communicate with members. So we have our pension fund, rbkcpensionfund.org website, which still contains information for scheme members about the actual RBKC fund. Then in the table, you can see there the second row down in section 3.1, the new self-service portal for scheme members will be called mypension.rbkc.gov.uk. So that will be active from the 1st of April. We will be communicating with all scheme members in March and April to let them know about that and how they can register to use the RBKC version of self-service. The member-specific notifications will still remain as annual benefit statements, and there will still be an annual pension increase letter going to pensioners in April this year from us. And then the remaining areas in section 3.1 about the general LGPS policies, it still is the case that lgpsmember.org is the place where members should go for general scheme information and scheme advice. I think it's fair to say that the one area where we do expect to do more work this year is with our employers. So the final row of data in the table in section 3.1 does mention that we will be communicating with our scheme employers via email, which we normally do, but there is going to be a lot more emphasis this year from 1st of April on compliance to make sure that we get the information coming in on time, particularly around starters and leavers from scheme employers, because we know that Surrey haven't been particularly good at monitoring that. Then the remainder of the report or the communications policy in section 3.2 is the table of different types of communications and how that communication is done and how frequently it's done as well. That hasn't really changed significantly because it's not specific to whether it's Surrey or ourselves running the service. It's just a general list of the different communication types that we still expect to follow from the 1st of April this year. So again, I'm very happy to take any questions that anyone may have.
I think this I appreciate is something you have to do, and you're rightfully looking at ways you are communicating with other scheme employers. But I think we mustn't lose sight of the value of communicating with employees, and particularly joiners, about the very considerable benefits they get from the local government pension scheme. And also, it's also best to start early by telling them what they should do and what they can expect if they leave our employ in terms of deferred pensions or transfers. And that might help reduce some of the problems we've been talking about.
Yes,
I think increasingly, some people stay somewhere for years, and then some people I know often come and with any employer, large employer, stay perhaps a year or two and then they move on, sometimes within the LGPS or indeed possibly outside the public sector. That will become more common, I think. So.
Yes, what happens is that anyone who's working regular hours with more than 3 months employment still gets contractually enrolled into the LGPS by the payroll provider of the employer. So that's a scheme requirement for all of our employers. And we do the aim or the idea will be that when we get that information coming in from Hampshire and other payroll providers, then within a defined period of time, normally 20 days, 20 working days, we write out to the scheme member confirming their admittance into the fund and asking them to complete what's called a transfer form of any previous pensions that they may have that they want to transfer into the RBKC fund. So we've already gone through that process with Surrey to define how it will work when we take over the service from 1st of April. So yes, you're right, absolutely. It is quite important that we continue to contact new members to let them know that they're in the fund and what the benefits are of joining.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or observations? No. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. I think that concludes the public part of the agenda. I move that we go to move to part B to discuss the confidential minutes, and also we'll have an update on an oral update on property. Is that agreed? So Tom, could you